Listen closely, because this was never meant for your ears. What I'm about to reveal was buried, literally buried under stone, darkness, and silence for nearly 3 decades. It was not police who first uncovered it, nor historians. It was construction workers, men who thought they were simply digging up old foundations in the summer heat of Tennessee. When their shovels struck something metallic, a rusted box, 3 feet deep, wrapped in oilcloth, locked against time itself. Inside that box were 47 photographs. Not police evidence. Not the kind you see in courtrooms. These were something else. A private ritual. A confession carved in silver nitrate. Each frame, each shadow, documenting not justice, but the slow, methodical destruction of a family, the Holloways of Ravenshollow Manor. The year was 1903 when the box was opened. But what the photographs revealed had taken place long before. On one night in 1876, a night that ended in 5 machete blows in silence that lingered for generations. You see, the photographs didn't just show blood. They showed intent, calculation, the work of someone who understood that images could trap a soul more completely than shackles. And the most horrific truth? The killer forced the family's own patriarch, Cornelius Holloway, an arrogant man, obsessed with photography, to document the death of his wife, his children, and finally, himself. Frame by frame, click, flash, darkness, until the blood was captured forever. Now, before I take you deeper into this mystery, before I show you why those photographs are more dangerous than any written confession, this knowledge is not free. Pay your toll. Like this video so it spreads. Share it with someone who dares to look into the abyss. And subscribe to Fear Liturgy, the only place where truths buried in blood and silence are. Resurrected for those willing to see. Because tonight, you won't just hear the story of the Holloway murders. You will descend with me into a labyrinth of control, corruption, and shadows. A labyrinth that has never stopped breathing. And once you've heard it, you can never return to the man you were before. Ravenshollow Manor did not rise from the Tennessee soil as a home. It rose as a monument to control. Built in 1834 by Jeremiah Holloway, the manor was carved out of tobacco, profits, and human bondage. Its bricks were set, not just with mortar, but with the blood of men who were forced to build what they could never own. Every beam, every nail, every stair creaked with the weight of bodies that bent but were never allowed to stand tall. By the time Jeremiah's son, Cornelius Holloway, inherited it, the Civil War had ended. At least, that's what the history books will tell you. But here's the truth you were never meant to hear. Wars don't end when the cannons go silent. They just change uniforms. The Holloways learned quickly that chains could be replaced with debts, lashes could be exchanged for contracts, and that the whip could hide inside the fine print of an agreement. This was the South's true rebirth, not of freedom, but of invisible shackles. Cornelius, however, wasn't content with financial dominance. He wanted something darker, something immortal. He had 2 obsessions: photography and humiliation. He built a private darkroom in the bowels of Ravenshollow Manor, a place where the air reeked of chemicals and shadows clung to the walls like secrets. He claimed he was preserving Southern life. In reality, he was preserving the broken faces of those he controlled. Capturing their suffering in frames he displayed like hunting trophies. And here lies the truth the newspapers never printed. Cornelius was not alone in this obsession. Across the South, men like him shared photographs like they once shared whiskey images of humiliation, traded like currency among a hidden fraternity of the powerful. They called it deterrence, but in truth, it was communion. A ritual of dominance masquerading as documentation. The photographs unearthed in 1903 weren't just evidence of a single night. They were a window into an entire system of control, an institution so deeply embedded that most people still cannot see it. The Holloway story is not only about one family's destruction, it is about how power itself feeds on secrecy, on the silencing of victims, and on the transformation of cruelty into memory. And if you're still listening, you already know. Memory is the sharpest weapon of all. In every empire of cruelty, there is always one man who sees the cracks before anyone else. At Ravenshollow Manor, that man was Ezekiel Hayes. To most, he was just the foreman. A tall, soft-spoken figure who could read and write skills rare among the workers of that time. Cornelius valued him, but only as much as a man values a tool. He saw literacy as a convenience, a way to keep the books in order and the workers in line. What Cornelius failed to see was that Hayes's real strength lay not in his hands, but in his mind. You see, Ezekiel carried a secret. As a younger man, he had worked briefly with a traveling photographer. He had learned how to handle a camera, how to prepare the glass plates, how to trap light and time inside a frame. He never spoke of this skill, never revealed it, because he understood the Holloway world was built on one rule. Knowledge is dangerous when it belongs to the wrong man. For years, Hayes watched Cornelius with eyes that recorded more than any lens. He saw the cruelty sharpen with each season, saw workers humiliated and beaten, saw families trapped in debts they could never escape. And he noticed something else: Cornelius wasn't punishing just for discipline. He was creating theater. Every strike, every scream, every moment of submission, staged for his camera. Imagine the fury burning in Ezekiel's silence. Not the fury of an impulsive man, but of a strategist. He began to map the Holloways like a hunter studies prey, cataloging weaknesses, fears, routines. Cornelius's arrogance, Margaret's dependence on opium, Caroline's obsession with reputation, Thomas's inner conflict, Edwin's stupidity. Every detail mattered. And while Cornelius thought he was the only man at Ravenshollow capturing truth on film, Ezekiel was already building a mirror in the shadows. Secretly, quietly, he began collecting images of his own images that would tell a different story. The story of a family drowning in its own corruption. Revenge doesn't begin with rage. It begins with observation. And Ezekiel Hayes was patient. He knew the day would come when the Holloway's empire of fear would collapse under the weight of its own sins. When it came, it wouldn't be quick. It would be documented, because photographs do not lie. And once captured, the truth cannot be buried forever. By the autumn of 1876, the air at Ravenshollow Manor carried a heaviness that no fire could chase away. The tobacco crop had failed. Debts mounted. And Cornelius Holloway's temper became a storm that broke daily upon the backs of his workers. Public beatings grew more frequent, but these were no longer punishments. They were performances. Cornelius staged them deliberately, setting his subjects against the backdrop of barns and fields, snapping photographs as if he were a conductor orchestrating a symphony of fear. He told himself these images were deterrents, proof of his authority. But in truth, they were trophies, and the trophies spread. Whispers among the workers spoke of Cornelius selling copies to neighboring landowners who shared his taste for cruelty. The Holloway name carried weight in Clarksville, but in the shadows, that weight was made of blood, humiliation, and secrets pressed onto fragile glass plates. The workers saw it. They felt it. And one by one, they stopped fearing Cornelius and began watching him. That was Ezekiel's influence. Quietly, he wove a web among the laborers, a network of trust hidden beneath silence. He gathered stories, testimonies, evidence of abuses, and sometimes, when the opportunity came, he gathered more than stories. Because Ezekiel had begun using his hidden skill. While Cornelius boasted of his deterrent documentation, Ezekiel was making his own. Workers positioned themselves as lookouts while he set up crude cameras pieced together from discarded parts. At first, he captured only fragments: a bruised face, a torn shirt, a lash across the skin. But gradually, he became bolder. His photographs built a case that was not legal, but moral, damning. Proof that Cornelius Holloway's empire was rotting from the inside. Still, Ezekiel knew evidence alone would never be enough. In 1876 Tennessee, the law bent toward men like Cornelius. Justice, as written on paper, served the powerful. No, Ezekiel was not preparing for court. He was preparing for judgment. And judgment required more than proof. It required transformation. The oppressor had to become the captive. The photographer had to become the photographed. Only then would the balance shift. Only then would power reverse. Every tick of Cornelius's camera was answered by the silent tick of Ezekiel's plan unfolding. Neither man knew it, but the shutters had already begun to click in rhythm with fate. And fate was patient. October 13th, 1876. The night that would end the Holloway dynasty began not with screams, but with silence. The kind of silence that creeps into the bones, making the air feel thicker, heavier, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Inside Ravenshollow Manor, the family gathered uneasily. Edwin had not returned from the fields. Margaret staggered through the halls in opium withdrawal, muttering about dreams filled with the sound of clicking shutters. Caroline whispered to her visiting friend that something felt off, though her pride forced her to dismiss her own dread. Thomas, the most rational, tried to calm them, but he too noticed things were wrong. Doors slightly ajar that no one remembered opening. Papers moved in Cornelius's study. Jewelry shifted in Caroline's box. Not stolen, but examined, documented. And then came the sound. Faint at first. A metallic click. Irregular. Not the rhythm of a clock. Not the echo of machinery. A camera shutter. But outside. Moving. First at the windows. Then along the porch. Then beneath the floors. Cornelius laughed it off at first. Arrogance masking fear. "Workers trying to frighten us," he muttered. But for the first time in his life, he was not in control. The hunter had become the hunted. Ezekiel and his network had spent months preparing this moment, surrounding the manor with cameras of their own, capturing not just violence but terror itself. The Holloway's own fear was being immortalized, frame by frame. This was no ambush of blades. This was psychological crucifixion. Ezekiel understood that true justice wasn't simply to kill the Holloways, it was to force them to experience the helplessness they had inflicted on others. To trap them in the cage of dread, documented in the same way Cornelius had once trapped his victims. And here's where you, the listener, step into the ritual. If you followed me this far, you're no longer just an observer. You are part of the descent. To mark that transformation, I want you to comment the phrase, "The shutter never lies," not once, but twice. Do it as a seal, a pact between you and this story. Because once you've written it, you're bound. Not to me, but to the truth that cannot be unseen. The clicking grew louder, closer, until every Holloway heart beat in time with the shutters of fate. By the third night, Ravenshollow Manor was no longer a house. It was a trap of mirrors. Every Holloway felt it, the sensation of being watched. Not by servants, not by neighbors, by something faceless, relentless, and close enough to hear their shallow breaths. Caroline Holloway, proud and defiant, was the first to crack. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror and swore the figure staring back wasn't her own. When she leaned closer, she noticed the faint outline of a man's shadow in the glass, a shadow holding something square. A camera, she screamed until her throat tore, but when Cornelius came storming down the hall, there was nothing. Only the mirror. Only Caroline's trembling hand pointing at her own reflection. Thomas, the scholar of the family, tried to hold on to reason. He spent hours pacing the library searching for explanations in books on optics, psychology, even superstition. But the more he read, the more he realized the pattern was deliberate. Someone was studying them, testing them. The doors that creaked open at night were no accident. The shifting objects in their rooms weren't theft, they were signals. Evidence being cataloged. They were specimens in an experiment of fear. Edwin, the brute, turned violent. He roamed the property with a shotgun, firing at shadows, at branches that bent in the wind, at his own imagination. But each morning, new photographs appeared on the manor steps. Images of Edwin himself, wild-eyed, gun raised, sweat pouring down his face. He was becoming the monster Ezekiel wanted him to see. And Cornelius? For the first time, the patriarch tasted helplessness. His dark room, once his sanctuary, was infiltrated. He found his chemical bottles moved, his negatives rearranged. One of them scratched with a single phrase carved into the emulsion: "Your lens cannot hide you." That was when he realized he wasn't just losing his family, he was losing his identity. The photographer had become the photographed. The power he had stolen through images was being turned back upon him. Every secret, every cruelty, every weakness was being captured, proof that his control was gone. Ravenshollow was no longer his kingdom. It was Ezekiel Hayes' gallery, and the Holloways were already hanging on its walls. On the fourth night, the Holloways decided they could endure no more. Sleep had abandoned them. Food turned to ash in their mouths, and every creak of the manor carried the weight of a threat. They gathered in Cornelius's study, the room where so many of his schemes had been born, and tried to build one final plan. "We leave," Caroline hissed, her eyes wild, hair unkempt. "Tonight, we pack nothing. We take the carriage to Clarksville, to Nashville, if we must. Whatever this is, it won't follow us into the city." Thomas shook his head. "No. Running makes us prey. Whoever is orchestrating this wants us afraid. If we scatter, we will be hunted more easily." Cornelius slammed his fist onto the desk, the once-proud patriarch reduced to trembling rage. "This is my land, my house. I will not be driven out by shadows and tricks." But even as he shouted, his voice betrayed him. For the first time, Cornelius Holloway sounded like a man who no longer believed his own words. "Edwin," fists clenched, proposed brute force. "We know it's Hayes. Has to be. We drag him in. We break him. We force him to tell us how far this goes." His solution was violence, the only language he had ever known. And so, under the cover of moonlight, Edwin and Cornelius led a small group of loyal workers to Ezekiel's cabin. They kicked down the door, overturned his meager possessions, tore through his papers, but the cabin was empty. No struggle, just silence. On the table, neatly arranged, lay photographs, not of the workers, not of Ezekiel, of the Holloways themselves. Margaret sleeping with her medicine bottle clutched to her chest. Caroline staring into a mirror. Edwin raising his shotgun into the night. Thomas pacing in the library. And Cornelius' mouth open mid-shout, fist frozen in the air, captured in a pose of false authority. Rage gave way to terror. The realization cut deeper than any blade. Ezekiel had been inside Ravenshollow Manor, inside their rooms, inside their lives, watching, recording, turning their fortress into a stage set for their downfall. When Edwin hurled the photographs into the fireplace, the images did not burn. They curled, smoked, and revealed duplicates beneath them, as if the fire itself could not erase what had been documented. It was no longer a question of escape. The Holloways weren't being haunted. They were being archived. By dawn, the Holloways had become prisoners in their own mansion. Not by chains, not by locked doors, but by fear. The workers were gone, the servants vanished, the fields abandoned. The once thriving estate stood hollow, its silence louder than any riot. Carolyn tried to compose herself, sitting upright in the parlor with trembling hands folded in her lap, as though etiquette could shield her. "We must hold our dignity," she whispered, as if the world still cared for such illusions. But her words were drowned out by the sound that had haunted them for days. The click of a camera shutter, somewhere just beyond the walls. Margaret collapsed onto the floor, clutching her arms, her body racked with tremors. Her laudanum had been replaced with poison of a different kind, withdrawal gnawing at her mind, dragging her into hallucinations. She clawed at invisible shapes in the air, crying out, "They're watching me even when I close my eyes." Thomas, once the family's rational voice, was now unraveling. He paced the length of the study, muttering fragments of Latin, half-remembered lines from his university lectures, as though words alone could ward off the fate pressing in around them. His mind cracked under the pressure of inevitability. And Cornelius, still clutching his camera, refused to let it go. He held the device like a weapon, barking into the empty halls. "You think you can out-document me? You think you can rewrite history? These photographs will prove my truth." Yet even as he spoke, he flinched at every shadow, his once commanding presence reduced to paranoia. The house itself began to betray them. Portraits were found replaced with photographs, grainy, haunting images of the Holloways caught off guard. A family dinner, their faces blurred by unease. Edwin staring into the darkness with suspicion. Carolyn crying alone in her chambers. None of these moments had been witnessed by family, yet someone had seen. Someone had captured. That night, the clicking grew louder. Not one shutter. Many. From the attic, from the cellar, from behind the walls. It was as if the manor itself had sprouted eyes. And then the photographs began to arrive. Slipped under doors. Left on pillows. Nailed to walls. Images of the Holloways, not as they once were, but as they were becoming. Broken, hunted, already corpses in waiting. The Holloways realized too late what Ezekiel Hayes had built. Not revenge. Not rebellion. An archive of their extinction. Midnight fell heavy on Ravenshollow Manor, the kind of silence that feels staged, like the world itself was holding its breath. The Holloways huddled together in the main parlor, the great fireplace roaring, yet no warmth touched them. Every corner seemed alive with shadows, every flicker of firelight another figure waiting to step forward. Then came the sound. Not footsteps this time, but movement in unison, a slow, deliberate procession. The front doors creaked open without force, as if the house itself had granted entry. Ezekiel Hayes stepped inside, not with violence, but with calm authority. Behind him, a dozen figures emerged, their faces obscured, their hands steady. Each carried a camera. Cornelius rose, clutching his own camera like a crucifix against demons. "You will not steal my legacy," he barked, his voice shaking. But Ezekiel didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his lens. Click. The flash of powder lit the room, capturing Cornelius in the moment of his unraveling. Caroline screamed and lunged forward, only to be restrained not with ropes, but with the presence of half a dozen shutters snapping in her. Face click, click, click. Each photograph was a chain stronger than iron. Each frame a record of her descent into madness. Thomas tried to reason, his voice cracking. "This isn't justice. This is madness." But Ezekiel turned to him, eyes steady. "No, Thomas. Madness's thinking power is eternal. Tonight, we record the end of that lie." Edwin fought hardest, swinging his shotgun wildly, firing into the ceiling until plaster rained down. But when the smoke cleared, he saw photographs already nailed to the walls, images of himself, rabid and foaming, immortalized as a beast. He dropped the gun. His fight was already over. Then, Ezekiel gave the order, his voice still quiet, still calm. "Frame them." The Holloways were forced, not by brute strength, but by a precision they could not fight. Cameras surrounded them from every angle, shutters firing like gunshots. Each pose, each expression, each trembling breath was documented. They were no longer people. They were subjects in a final portrait, the Holloway family, undone by their own sins. And then came the knives. Not swift, not merciful, but methodical. Each blow captured, each scream frozen forever in glass. When it was done, photographs revealed a truth too terrible for words. Cornelius Holloway had been made to press the shutter. His family's death, frame by frame, carried his signature. The year was 1903, when workers at Ravenshollow, nothing more than a decaying husk, broke open the foundation and uncovered the rusted metal box. Inside, carefully wrapped in oil-stained cloth, lay the photograph's 47 frames of horror, preserved like relics of an unholy ritual. They expected crime scene evidence. What they found was something far more unsettling. Each photograph was deliberate, composed, almost artistic. The Holloway family's fall wasn't captured in chaos. It was choreographed. Every humiliation, every scream, every drop of blood had been staged for the camera's eye. And at the center of it all was Cornelius himself, visible in reflections in mirrored glass. in trembling shadows forced to press the shutter again and again as his empire collapsed around him. The investigators who examined the photographs described them as unbearable to study, not simply because of the violence, but because of the silence they carried. The silence of complicity. The silence of history that had been buried beneath wealth and power. For the first time, the Holloways could not control the narrative. The truth had developed itself, frame by frame. The manor was abandoned forever after that discovery. No one dared live within its walls. Locals claimed they could still hear the clicking of shutters at night, as though the house itself remembered. Some whispered that the cameras had never stopped, that they still recorded, waiting for new subjects. But here's the part most people never grasp. The photographs weren't just revenge. They were a warning. Proof that power built on cruelty always turns inward. That the same tools of domination, control, humiliation, manipulation can be reversed, weaponized, reflected back like a mirror. The Holloways were not just murdered, they were documented into oblivion. And now you've seen it too. You've followed their descent. You've stared into their gallery of extinction. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Because once you've heard the shudder, once you've glimpsed the truth hidden in plain sight, you can't close your eyes again. If you felt the weight of this story, leave your mark below. Type the phrase, "The lens cannot hide me," twice in the comments. Not just for the algorithm, but as a reminder to yourself and to everyone watching that you are not blind. This is Fear Liturgy, and this was the Holloways of Ravenshollow.